A single glance across a crowded five-star restaurant. On one side, Beatrice Davenport, a woman whose name is whispered in boardrooms, a billionaire matriarch encased in ice, her fortune as vast as her loneliness. On the other, Mia Russo, a young waitress invisible to the world, her feet aching and her dreams shrinking with every meager tip. They are strangers separated by a chasm of wealth and status. But the waitress wears a small, tarnished silver locket around her neck. It's a simple, worthless trinket to anyone else. But to Beatrice it is a key to a locked room in her heart, a room that has been dark for 22 years. In 1 second, the billionaire's carefully constructed world shatters, and a single tear cuts a path down her cheek. What she does next will unravel a secret that will destroy one life and redeem another. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement. Perched on the 65th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park, it was a cathedral of modern gastronomy, where New York's elite came to consecrate their deals and display their dynasties. For Mia Russo, it was just work. It was the frantic polishing of silverware, the memorization of unpronounceable French dishes, the forced, weary smile that had to remain plastered on her face for 8 straight hours. At 22, Mia's life was a tightrope walk over a chasm of debt. There was her mother's lingering medical bills from a fight with cancer. She'd thankfully won the rent on their tiny Queen's apartment that seemed to inflate with every breath she took, and the dream of a community college art class that felt more distant than the moon. Her only luxury, her only connection to a past she barely knew, was the silver locket she wore every single day. It was cool against her skin, its chain thin and delicate. The face of the locket was etched with a weeping willow, its branches so finely detailed they seemed to sway. Her father had given it to her on her 5th birthday, just before he died in a construction accident. "This was your mother's," he had whispered, his voice thick with a sadness she was too young to understand. "It's the most precious thing in the world. Never take it off." She never had. Her mother, Isabella, had died giving birth to her. The locket was all Mia had of her. On that Tuesday evening, the restaurant was humming with the low thrum of power. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil and expensive perfume. Maya was assigned to the most coveted section, the corner table with the panoramic view of the glittering city. The reservation was under the name Davenport. Beatrice Davenport arrived precisely at 8:00 p.m. She moved not like a woman of 80, but like a glacier, slow, unstoppable, and cold. Her silver hair was coiled into an impeccable chignon, and her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. She was flanked by her grandnephew, and heir apparent Spencer Cunningham, a man in his late 30s with a politician's smile and a shark's eyes, and his impeccably dressed wife, Fiona. Mia approached the table, her hand steady, despite the intimidating aura of the trio. "Good evening. My name is Mia, and I will be your server tonight. May I start you with some water?" Spencer waved a dismissive hand, already engrossed in the wine list. Fiona was adjusting her diamond bracelet, but Beatrice Davenport's gaze was fixed not on the menu, not on the view, but on the small, unassuming piece of jewelry nestled at the base of Mia's throat. Time seemed to slow. The clatter of the dining room faded into a dull roar in Beatrice's ears. The locket, the weeping willow, the specific, almost imperceptible nick on the clasp. It couldn't be. That locket had been buried. It had been lost to the world along with her heart 22 years ago. It had belonged to her daughter, her Isabella. Where? Beatrice's voice was a croak, a dry rustle of leaves that made Spencer look up from his menu in annoyance. "Where did you get that?" Mia's hand flew to her neck reflexively. I'm sorry, Mum." "The necklace." Beatrice insisted, her voice gaining a tremor of raw, unfiltered emotion that startled everyone at the table. She leaned forward, her meticulously applied composure cracking like thin ice. Her eyes, which had been so cold, were now wide with a mixture of disbelief, horror, and a desperate, agonizing hope. It was my mother's," Mia stammered, confused and intimidated. "She passed away." The words struck Beatrice like a physical blow. She made a small choking sound. The polite mask she had worn for decades crumbled into dust. Her hand, laden with heavy ancestral rings, flew to her mouth. A single tear escaped then, another tracing paths through the faint powder on her wrinkled cheeks. The billionaire matriarch, the formidable titan of industry known as the Iron Dame of Wall Street, was crying. Not quiet, dignified tears, but the wrenching, ragged sobs of profound and sudden grief. "Beatrice, for heaven's sake!" Spencer hissed, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Get a hold of yourself. It's just a piece of costume jewelry." But Beatrice didn't hear him. She only saw the ghost of her daughter, her runaway lost Isabella, standing before her in a cheap waitress uniform. The manager, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Dubois, rushed over his face, a mask of panicked apology. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Davenport?" "Get her away from me," Spencer snapped, gesturing at the bewildered Mia. "She's obviously upset our aunt." Mia stood frozen, the locket suddenly feeling like a lead weight on her chest. What was happening? The old woman was still crying, her gaze locked on Mia, her lips forming a silent word Mia couldn't understand. Isabella. Mr. Dubois grabbed Mia's arm, his grip tight and unforgiving. "My office. Now." As she was pulled away, Mia looked back one last time. Through the blur of chaos and confusion, she saw the old woman, Beatrice Davenport, reach a trembling hand out towards her, her face a portrait of utter devastation. It was a look of such profound loss that it would haunt Mia's dreams for nights to come. The walk to Mr. Dubois' office was a walk of shame. The whispers and stares of the other staff members felt like tiny needles on Mia's skin. She had done something wrong, though she had no idea what. Mr. Dubois' office was small and smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. He didn't ask her to sit. He paced back and forth, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Do you have any idea who that was?" "Rousseau," he asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. "That was Beatrice Davenport. She practically owns the building we're in. Her family's Davenport Foundation is one of our primary investors. We cater her galas. We bend over backwards for her. And you made her cry. I don't know what I did." Mia's voice was pleading. "She just asked about my necklace." "I don't care what you did or didn't do." He cut her off. "Spencer Cunningham just called me. He said you were impertinent and that your presence was distressing. He suggested your employment here is no longer tenable." Mia's stomach plummeted. "He's having me fired over a necklace. He's ensuring his family's dining experience is untroubled," Dubois said, avoiding her eyes. "Pack your things. I'll have your final check mailed to you." Tears of frustration and injustice burned in Mia's eyes. She had worked double shifts for 6 months at that place, enduring rude customers and aching feet, all for this. To be thrown out like trash because a rich woman had a strange emotional reaction to her mother's locket. She stumbled out of the office and to the locker room in a daze. Her friend and fellow waitress Chloe was waiting for her, her face etched with concern. "I can't believe he fired you," Chloe whispered, handing Mia her worn-out backpack. That old woman was staring at you like she'd seen a ghost. I don't get it, Maya said, her voice cracking as she changed out of her uniform for the last time. It was just my locket. She clutched the cool metal, the familiar weight a small comfort in the swirling chaos of her life. Now she had no job, rent was due in a week, and her mother's pharmacy bill was sitting on the kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb. Meanwhile, back in the black town car speeding down Park Avenue, the atmosphere was arctic. Beatrice sat staring blankly out the window, her face pale and tear-streaked. Spencer, having settled the bill and made his displeasure known to the restaurant management, was fuming. "I cannot believe the scene you made, Beatrice," he began, his voice laced with condescension. "Crying over a waitress's cheap trinket. People were staring. Do you know how that reflects on the family, on Cunningham Global?" Beatrice turned her head slowly, her gaze so sharp and piercing that Spencer flinched. "That was Isabella's locket," Spencer scoffed. "Oh, please, don't start with that. Isabella's things were all lost. It's a coincidence, a copy. That girl is probably a grifter who researched you. There was a chip on the clasp." Beatrice said, her voice barely a whisper. "From when she dropped it on the marble steps at the summer house in the Hamptons. She was 17. She cried for an hour because she thought she'd ruined it." The specificity of the memory silenced Spencer for a moment, but his skepticism quickly returned, mutated into suspicion. If this was true, it wasn't a ghost story. It was a threat. "Fine," he said smoothly. "Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's the real locket. How would a girl like that get it? It means it was stolen. She's the descendant of a thief, and you should call the police." He saw the situation not as a family tragedy, but as a problem to be managed, an asset to be protected. The Davenport fortune was his birthright, and he wouldn't let some sob story about a long-lost locket put a single crack in his claim. But Beatrice wasn't listening. A fragile, terrifying hope was blooming in the barren wasteland of her heart. For 22 years, she had lived with the official story her daughter Isabella had run away with a penniless artist, and according to the private investigator she'd hired years ago, had died of pneumonia in some squalid apartment in Portland, childless. The case was closed. Her heart was closed, but the girl's words echoed in her mind. "It was my mother's." She passed away. The next morning, Beatrice did not call the police. She called Arthur Pendleton, her head of security and personal confidant, for over 40 years. Arthur was a quiet, immaculately dressed man with kind eyes and an unwavering loyalty that was a rare commodity in Beatrice's world. "Arthur," she said, her voice strained over the phone, "I have a task for you. It's of the utmost importance, and is to be kept completely confidential, especially from Spencer." She told him about the waitress, the restaurant, the locket. She didn't share her burgeoning, impossible theory, but simply gave him a directive. "Find out everything there is to know about that girl. Her name is Mia Russo. Find her." 2 days later, Maya was sitting at her small kitchen table, circling minimum-wage job ads in the paper, when there was a knock on the door. She expected the landlord coming to ask for the rent she didn't have. Instead, she found a tall, older gentleman in a perfectly tailored grey suit. His expression was gentle but serious. "Miss Mia Russo?" he asked, his voice calm and respectful. "Yes," she said, clutching the doorframe. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I work for Mrs. Beatrice Davenport," he said, handing her a pristine business card. "She has requested a private meeting with you. She would like to discuss the other night. She will, of course, compensate you for your time and for the distress the incident caused." He gestured subtly to a black sedan parked at the curb. Mia's mind raced. The rich old woman who got her fired now wanted to see her fear warred with a desperate curiosity. What could she possibly want? Perhaps an apology, perhaps an accusation. But with no job and no prospects, what did she have to lose? All right, Mia said, her chin held high. I'll talk to her. The Davenport residence was not a home. It was a fortress of wealth and time. A sprawling penthouse on Fifth Avenue, its windows offered a god's-eye view of Central Park. The air inside was still and silent, smelling faintly of lemon oil and old money. Marble floors were softened by antique Persian rugs, and the walls were adorned with paintings that Mia recognized from her art history books. It felt like a museum, a beautiful, cold, and lonely place. Arthur led her through a grand foyer into a formal sitting room. Beatrice Davenport was waiting seated in a high-backed armchair near the large windows. She was dressed in a simple but elegant silk blouse and trousers, but today, without the public pretense, she looked her age. Frail, tired, and deeply sad. Mia stood awkwardly in the center of the room, clutching her backpack strap like a lifeline. "Thank you for coming, Miss Russo," Beatrice said, her voice softer than it had been at the restaurant. She gestured to a chair opposite her. "Please sit." Mia sat on the edge of the cushion, her back ramrod straight. "I would like to begin," Beatrice started, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, "by offering my sincerest apologies for my outburst the other evening, and for the consequences it had on your employment. It was inexcusable. Mr. Pendleton has a check for you that will cover your wages for the next 6 months. It's the least I can do." Mia was stunned. "Thank you," she mumbled, not knowing what else to say. "That is a formality." Beatrice continued, her gaze intensifying as it fell once more on the locket. "What I truly want is to talk about that necklace. You said it belonged to your mother." "Yes," Mia said, her defensiveness rising. "It's all I have of her." May I see it?" Beatrice asked, her voice laced with a raw vulnerability that chipped away at Mia's apprehension. Hesitantly, Mia unclasped the thin chain and handed the locket over. Beatrice took it with a trembling hand, as if she were holding a fragile bird. She ran her thumb over the weeping willow, her eyes misting over. Using a carefully manicured nail, she clicked open the tiny clasp. Mia had never been able to open it. The clasp was stuck fast. But Beatrice opened it with an ease born of long familiarity. Inside, on one side, was a tiny faded photograph of a young woman. She had a cascade of dark curly hair and a defiant, joyful smile. On the other side, a tiny inscription was barely visible, etched in elegant script, "Pour toujours mon saule pleureur," forever my weeping willow. "This woman," Beatrice said, her voice thick with emotion, as she showed the photo to Mia. "Do you know who she is?" Mia peered at the tiny image. The woman was beautiful, and there was something faintly familiar in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile. "No, I always assumed it was my mother. It is," Beatrice whispered, a single tear tracing its familiar path down her cheek. "Her name was Isabella Davenport. She was my daughter." The world tilted on its axis. Mia stared at the billionaire, then back at the photo, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. Davenport. Her mother was a Davenport. It made no sense. Her name was Isabella Russo. She had died in a hospital in Queens, a Jane Doe, who was later identified by Mia's father, Leo Russo. That was the story she had always been told. That's not possible," Mia stammered. "My mother's name was Isabella Russo. My father was Leo Russo. They weren't people like you." The last words came out with more bitterness than she intended. Beatrice flinched but didn't look away. Isabella fell in love with a man I didn't approve of. A painter. His name was Leo Russo. I was proud. I was a fool. I told her if she chose him, she would no longer be a Davenport. I would disinherit her. I thought she would choose the life she knew. I thought she would choose me. Beatrice's voice broke. She chose him. She walked out of this apartment with nothing but the clothes on her back and that locket which I had given her for her 16th birthday. She was 19. I never saw her again. I searched for her, of course, but my pride was a poison. I told my investigator to be discreet. By the time he found a trace of her, it was too late. He told me she had died. He said there was no child. Mia's head was spinning. This cold, imposing woman was her grandmother, the mother who had abandoned her own child to a life of poverty and struggle. Anger, hot and fierce, surged through her, eclipsing her confusion. "No child!" Mia's voice was sharp. "She had me. Where were you when she was sick? Where were you when my father was working himself to death, trying to pay for a doctor? Where were you when he died, and I was sent to live with his mother, who could barely afford to feed me?" The questions hung in the silent, opulent room, each one a slap in the face. Beatrice visibly crumpled the weight of Mia's words, the weight of 22 years of regret crashing down on her. "I didn't know," she whispered, her face ashen. "I swear to you, on my daughter's memory, I did not know you existed. The man I hired, he either failed me or he lied. He told me she died alone." Mia stared at her, wanting to hate her, wanting to scream at her for the lifetime of hardship that her pride had caused. But all she could see was an old broken woman, her eyes reflecting a pain that mirrored her own. "My father," Maya said softly, her anger giving way to a deep, aching sadness. "He told me my mother was the most wonderful person he'd ever met. He said she was like sunshine. He never said she was rich. He never said she had a family who threw her away." "I did," Beatrice confessed, her voice ragged with self-loathing. "I threw away my own sunshine, and I have lived in the dark ever since." In the heavy silence that followed, a truth began to settle between them. It was a fragile, jagged thing full of sharp edges and unanswered questions. Mia was not just Mia Russo, the poor waitress from Queens. She was the granddaughter of Beatrice Davenport. She was the heir to a world she never knew existed, a world that had rejected her mother and left her to die. The revelation was not a key to a fairy tale castle. It felt like a key to a tomb. Beatrice, seeing the storm of emotions on Mia's face, the anger, the confusion, the deep-seated grief, knew that words were not enough. Proof wasn't enough. Mia needed to understand. She needed to see the ghost of the past, not as a caricature of rich girl and poor boy, but as the vibrant, tragic reality it had been. "Arthur," Beatrice said, her voice finding a sliver of its old strength, "bring the box." Arthur, who had been standing discreetly by the door, nodded and disappeared into the labyrinthine depths of the penthouse. He returned a few moments later with a large, dust-covered rosewood box. He placed it on the glass table between them. "I locked this away the day my investigator told me Isabella was gone," Beatrice said, her fingers tracing the inlaid mother-of-pearl on the lid. "I couldn't bear to look at it, but I could never bring myself to destroy it." She opened the lid. The box was a time capsule of a life cut short. There were stacks of letters tied with faded silk ribbons, a pressed Browning gardenia, a child's drawing of a stick figure labelled Mama, and photo albums bound in Moroccan leather. Beatrice picked up the first album. This was Isabella. The photographs painted a picture of a life Mia could barely imagine. A laughing baby with Beatrice's stormy eyes, a little girl on a pony in the Hamptons, a teenager in a debutante gown looking beautiful, but trapped her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Then the pictures began to change. Around the age of 18, a new face appeared. A young man with paint-splattered jeans, unruly dark hair, and a smile so incandescent it seemed to light up the photograph. He was often in the background at the edge of a garden party, or snapped in a candid moment in Washington Square Park. That was Leo Russo. He was a student at NYU on a scholarship. Beatrice explained, her voice soft with memory. He was brilliant, passionate. He saw the world in colors and light I had long since forgotten. Isabella met him during a visit to a gallery. For her, it was instant. For me, it was a disaster. She turned the page. A letter written in Isabella's elegant looping script was tucked inside. Mother, you don't understand. Leo sees me. Not Davenport Industries, not the trust fund. Me. When I'm with him, I can finally breathe. The story spilled out, colored by Beatrice's painful, honest recollections. She showed Mia the letters she had written back, cold and demanding, filled with ultimatums. She recounted the arguments that echoed through the vast, empty halls of the penthouse. I saw him as a threat. Beatrice confessed, her gaze distant. He had nothing. No name, no money, no connections. In my world, that made him dangerous. I thought he was after her fortune. I couldn't see that he was after her heart, which she was giving him freely. The final confrontation had happened in this very room. Isabella, just 19, had announced she was leaving to live with Leo in his tiny walk-up in the East Village. Beatrice had delivered her final, cruel ultimatum. I told her, the moment you walk out that door, you are no longer my daughter. The Davenport name and everything that comes with it will be dead to you. Beatrice's voice cracked. I expected her to cry to back down, but she just looked at me with such pity in her eyes and said, Then I guess I've been an orphan for a long time. And then she was gone. The story then shifted, becoming a tapestry woven from the threads of the private investigator's old clinical reports and Beatrice's pained imagination. Isabella and Leo Russo, stripped of all resources, had struggled immensely. Leo took on manual labor jobs, painting houses, and working construction, his art relegated to late-night sketches. Isabella, who had never worked a day in her life, took jobs as a cleaner, a dishwasher. They moved from one cheap apartment to another, always one step ahead of eviction. The investigator's report said they moved to Portland. Beatrice murmured a frown, creasing her brow. He said that's where she passed. They never went to Portland. Mia interjected, her voice quiet but firm. They stayed in New York. They were in Queens when I was born. My father's mother, my nonna, lived there. They stayed to be close to her. A look of profound confusion crossed Beatrice's face. But the report was so detailed, it had a death certificate, a location. The foundation of her 22 years of grieving began to crumble, revealing something ugly and deceptive beneath. Mia then shared her side of the story, the fragmented memories and stories told to her by her paternal grandmother. She spoke of her father's boundless love for her mother, how he described her as a fallen star he was lucky enough to find. He never spoke of her family, only of their love. He told Mia that her mother had gotten sick after she was born, an infection that the overworked doctors at the city clinic couldn't manage. He had spent every penny they had sold his most treasured paintings for next to nothing trying to save her. When she died, he was broken. Mia said, her own eyes welling with tears. Nonna said a part of him died with her. He worked every hour God gave him to provide for me. He was on that construction site, working a double shift on faulty scaffolding, because he was trying to save enough money to buy me a proper birthday cake. The two stories, one of rich, prideful rejection, and the other of poor, desperate love, merged in the silent room, creating a single heart-breaking narrative. Isabella hadn't just died. She had been erased. Her powerful mother had cut her off, and the world of poverty had swallowed her whole. As Mia spoke, Beatrice's grief was slowly being eclipsed by a cold, sharp-edged fury. The private investigator, a man named Robert Sterling, whom she had paid a fortune, had not just failed her. He had lied. He had fed her a fabricated story, complete with a forged death certificate from a city thousands of miles away. Why to close the case quickly to spare her feelings? Or was it something more sinister? Her gaze fell on the door, and her thoughts turned to her grandnephew Spencer. He had been a teenager when Isabella left, but he was always ambitious, always watching, always positioning himself. He had taken over the family office a decade ago. He managed all the old files, all the family's private business. Could he have known? Did he perpetuate the lie to secure his own position as the sole heir? The possibility was a venomous snake coiling in her gut. She had lost her daughter to her own pride, but she may have lost the chance to know her granddaughter to someone else's greed. "There is more to this story," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper that Mia had not heard before. It was the voice of the Iron Dame. "And I will uncover every last lie." News of Mia's visit to the penthouse travelled through the family's inner circle with the speed of a lit fuse. Spencer Cunningham, who had been enjoying a self-congratulatory lunch, received a terse call from his mother Beatrice's niece, who had heard it from a gossiping maid. A young woman, a waitress, had spent over 2 hours in a private meeting with the matriarch. Spencer's blood ran cold. He had dismissed the incident at the restaurant as a moment of senile sentimentality. But a private meeting, a check for 6 months' wages. This was not a passing fancy. This was an investigation, and an investigation was a threat. He immediately went to his great-aunt's residence, using his own key to let himself in. He found Beatrice in her study, the rosewood box open on her desk, her face a mask of grim determination. "Beatrice, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, foregoing any pleasantries. "I hear you had that waitress here. You're encouraging this charlatan." "That charlatan, as you call her Spencer, is my granddaughter." Beatrice stated, her voice devoid of warmth. Spencer laughed, a short barking sound. "Oh, this is richer than I thought. She's really sunk her claws into you. Did she show you a locket and spin you a tale, Beatrice? You're smarter than this. She's a common grifter. I'll have my legal team draw up a restraining order by the end of the day." "You will do no such thing." Beatrice countered, her eyes flashing dangerously. "I am handling this." "Handling it?" he scoffed, striding closer to her desk. "You're being taken for a fool. Let me guess, soon she'll need money for some sick relative, or she'll claim a DNA test proves her story. It's the oldest trick in the book." "Tell me, Spencer." Beatrice said, her voice dangerously quiet as she leaned forward. "The investigation into Isabella's disappearance, the one conducted by Robert Sterling. You consolidated all the old family files a few years ago. You must have reviewed his report." A flicker of something panic caution crossed Spencer's face, but he quickly masked it with his usual arrogant smirk. Of course, it was a tragedy. Died of pneumonia in Portland, poor thing. All very thorough. "Was it?" Beatrice asked. "Because Mia tells me her mother, Isabella Russo, died in Queens, New York. She has a birth certificate, and she had a daughter." Spencer's carefully constructed composure began to crack. Birth certificates can be forged, stories can be invented. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She's planting seeds of doubt, turning you against your own family, the family that has stood by you. The family that stands to inherit everything. Beatrice finished for him, her tone icy. The accusation hung in the air between them. Spencer's face hardened, his affable mask falling away to reveal the cold, calculating ambition beneath. I have protected this family's legacy while you were locked away in your grief, he spat. I have grown our fortune, I have maintained our name, and I will not see it all jeopardized by some street urchin with a sob story and a piece of stolen jewelry. He stormed out the heavy study door, slamming shut behind him. But he wasn't just angry, he was terrified. He immediately got on the phone, not to his lawyers, but to a man he kept on a private, unofficial payroll. A fixer. I have a situation, Spencer said, his voice low and urgent. A girl named Mia Russo from Queens. I need you to dig into her life. I want every speeding ticket, every late bill, every questionable friend, every mistake she has ever made. I want you to find something, or create something, that will make her radioactive. I want Beatrice to see her as nothing but gutter trash, and I need it yesterday. His next call was even more crucial. He dialed a number in a quiet retirement community in Florida. Robert, it's Spencer Cunningham. Yes, it's been a while. Listen, we have a problem. It's about the old Isabella Davenport file. It's been reopened. The retired private investigator on the other end of the line went silent. A deal made, and a secret buried over 2 decades ago was about to be exhumed. Meanwhile, Maya returned to her small apartment, feeling like she had stepped out of a strange and unsettling dream. She told her mother's story to her friend Chloe, who listened with wide-eyed astonishment. "So you're telling me you're basically a secret princess?" Chloe exclaimed. "Mia, this is life-changing." "I don't know what it is," Mia confessed, sinking onto her lumpy couch. "That woman, my grandmother, she's so cold. But the way she looked when she talked about my mum, it's all so confusing. And her nephew Spencer, he was at the restaurant. He looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe." Her apprehension was well-founded. The next few days were a quiet assault. Her landlord suddenly served her with an eviction notice for being 3 days late on rent, something he'd always been lenient about before. She got a call from the community college, flagging a discrepancy in her financial aid application from 2 years ago, threatening to revoke her eligibility. Her car parked on the street had its tires slashed. They were all small, explainable misfortunes on their own, but together they felt like a coordinated attack. It was a campaign of 1,000 cuts designed to destabilize her, to make her desperate. The final blow came when Chloe called her in a panic. 2 men in suits had come to the restaurant asking the staff questions about Mia. They weren't asking about her work ethic. They were asking if she ever drank on the job, if she had a boyfriend who sold drugs, if she was known to steal from the till. They were poisoning the well, meticulously assassinating her character. Mia felt a cold dread creep over her. This wasn't about a family reunion anymore. This was a war. And Spencer Cunningham had just fired the first shots. She was out of her depth, a small boat caught in the wake of a massive, ruthless battleship. He wasn't just trying to discredit her, he was trying to break her. The campaign against Mia was having its desired effect, not on her, but on Beatrice. Spencer fed his great-aunt a steady drip of poison packaged as concerned counsel. "I had my people do a discreet background check just to be safe," he'd say, leaving a file on her desk. It seems the girl was evicted. A history of financial instability. A day later, "It's a shame. There are whispers from her old job about missing cash from the register. Nothing proven, of course, but the timing is coincidental. He was painting a picture of a desperate, manipulative young woman, a classic gold digger. Beatrice, her heart already brittle with decades of grief and mistrust, began to waver. Was her desperate hope just a mirage? Was she allowing a stranger to desecrate Isabella's memory? The doubts planted by Spencer and watered by her own fear began to take root. Mia, feeling the walls closing in, knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. Swallowing her pride, she called the number on the business card Arthur Pendleton had given her. "I need to speak with Mrs. Davenport," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's important." Arthur, sensing the urgency, arranged a meeting for the following day. But this time the atmosphere was different. The air in the penthouse was thick with suspicion. Spencer was there, standing behind Beatrice's chair like a sentinel, his arms crossed, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "Miss Russo." Beatrice began, her tone formal and cold, a stark contrast to their last meeting. "Spencer has brought some troubling information to my attention. Let me guess." Mia shot back, her fear being burned away by a surge of righteous anger. "I'm suddenly a thief, a deadbeat, and a con artist. Your nephew is very thorough, I'll give him that." "My nephew is trying to protect this family," Beatrice said, though her eyes held a flicker of uncertainty. "Protect it from what? The truth?" Mia took a step forward, her gaze locked on Beatrice. "My mother, your daughter, died because she had nothing. I've had nothing my whole life. Does that make me a bad person? Does being poor make me a liar? You told me you regretted your pride, but you're doing the exact same thing right now. You're choosing your money over your blood." The words hit Beatrice harder than Spencer's fabricated reports. She saw a flash of Isabella in Mia's defiant stance, the same fire, the same refusal to be intimidated. But Spencer stepped in, smooth and venomous. "Enough theatrics. The locket could have been found sold stolen. It proves nothing. Unless you have concrete, irrefutable proof, this conversation is over." He believed he had her cornered. A birth certificate could be challenged. A story was just a story. He had covered all the bases. It was then that Arthur Pendleton, who had been standing silently by the door, cleared his throat. "If I may, Mrs. Davenport," he said, stepping forward. All eyes turned to him. "While Mr. Cunningham was investigating Miss Russo, I took the liberty of investigating something else." He placed a thin file on the desk. "I was troubled by the discrepancy in the private investigator's report, the claim that Isabella died in Portland. I started with the investigator himself, Mr. Robert Sterling." Spencer's face went rigid. "Mr. Sterling is retired now, living comfortably in Florida." Arthur continued, his calm voice cutting through the tension. His retirement package, it turns out, was funded by a very generous consulting fee paid out from a subsidiary of Cunningham Global, authorized 10 years ago by Mr. Cunningham himself. "That's a lie," Spencer blustered. "Is it?" Arthur asked calmly. Because Mr. Sterling, when faced with evidence of wire fraud and the prospect of federal prison, became quite talkative. He confessed that 22 years ago he did find Isabella. He found her sick, pregnant, and living in Queens. He reported this to his point of contact. Beatrice looked bewildered. His contact was me. He never told me. "Initially, yes," Arthur said, his gaze shifting to Spencer. "But at the time, a very ambitious young Mr. Spencer Cunningham was interning in the family office. He intercepted the report. He saw an opportunity. He paid Sterling to close the case, to fabricate the story of her death in Portland, childless. He wanted the sole heir, presumptive his mother, to be next in line. and by extension himself. Years later, when he took over, he paid Sterling again for his permanent silence. The room was utterly silent. Beatrice stared at Spencer, her face a canvas of dawning horror and betrayal. He had not only let Isabella die alone, but he had also stolen 22 years from Beatrice and Mia. He had let his great-aunt wallow in a lie, all for money. "This is insane," Spencer stammered, his bravado gone, replaced by pure panic. "He's a disgruntled employee. This is all hearsay." "Not quite," a new voice said from the doorway. An elderly woman with a kind face and weary eyes was standing there, leaning on a cane. Arthur helped her into the room. "This is Maria Flores," Arthur announced. She was a nurse at the clinic in Queens 22 years ago. She was the one who held Isabella's hand when she passed. Mia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The old nurse looked directly at Mia, her eyes filling with tears of recognition. "Oh, my dear," she whispered. "You have your mother's eyes." She then turned to Beatrice. "Isabella talked about you," Maria said, her voice soft but clear. "She wasn't angry. She was just sad. She said you didn't understand her love. Before she died, she made me promise something. She was too weak to write, so I wrote it for her." From her handbag, she pulled out an old yellowed envelope. She handed it to Beatrice. She said, "If you ever find my mother, please give this to her." I never knew who to find, but Mr. Pendleton found me. With trembling hands, Beatrice opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the writing in a neat clinical script. But the words were pure Isabella. "Dearest Mama, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. Please don't be sad. I have lived more in the last 3 years with Leo than I ever did in that big, quiet apartment. He is my heart, and we made something beautiful. A daughter. I named her Amelia. Mia. It means industrious and striving, and I know she will be a fighter. I'm not leaving her alone. She has her father, the best man in the world. I want you to know that I forgive you. I hope one day you can forgive me for leaving. The locket is for my Mia, so she always has a piece of me and of you. The weeping willow. You always said it looked sad, but I think it looks strong. Its branches bend, but they never break. Be happy, Mama. I love you. Forever your weeping willow Isabella." The letter fell from Beatrice's fingers. A sob, raw and guttural, tore from her chest. The final undeniable proof was not in a document or a DNA test, but in her daughter's own words, a message of love and forgiveness from beyond the grave. She looked up, her eyes, swimming in tears, meeting Mia's. The 22 years of silence, the lies, the pain, it all melted away in that one shattering moment of truth. Spencer, pale and exposed, backed towards the door. "Beatrice, Get out!" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that was terrifying in its quiet intensity. "Get out of my house! Get out of my life! You are nothing to me!" He fled. The serpent had been cast out of the garden, leaving behind the wreckage he had wrought. In the center of the devastation, a grandmother and a granddaughter, strangers only days ago, finally truly saw each other for the first time. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of discovery. The cavernous penthouse, once a mausoleum of grief, slowly began to feel like a home. The silence was filled not with the ticking of clocks, but with stories. Mia, with Beatrice at her side, went through the rosewood box, and for the first time, she truly met her mother. She learned that Isabella loved the rain, hated opera, and had a mischievous laugh that could fill a room. Beatrice, in turn, learned about the granddaughter she never knew she had. She heard about Mia's talent for sketching, her quiet resilience, and the fierce loyalty she had for the people she loved. They were two women separated by generations and circumstance, piecing together the family that had been stolen from them. There was no magical transformation. Mia didn't suddenly start wearing designer clothes or develop a taste for caviar. She enrolled in the art class she'd always dreamed of her tuition paid for, but she took the subway to get there. Beatrice, for her part, found the Iron Dame persona flaking away, revealing the softer, more vulnerable woman beneath. For the first time in decades, she laughed, a real unrestrained sound that made Arthur smile whenever he heard it. The legal fallout for Spencer was swift and brutal. Beatrice, with a clarity she hadn't possessed in years, cut him and his entire branch of the family out of her will and her life. She removed him from the board of Davenport Industries and initiated legal proceedings to reclaim the funds he had used to bribe Robert Sterling. The Cunningham name, once a symbol of New York society, became synonymous with disgrace. One sunny afternoon, Beatrice and Mia stood before two headstones in a quiet, beautiful cemetery overlooking the Hudson River. Beatrice had arranged to have Leo Russo's remains moved to rest beside Isabella's, whose memorial had until now been empty. "He was a good man," Beatrice said, placing a bouquet of white lilies on Leo's grave. "He loved her. I was too blind to see it. He loved her enough for a lifetime," Mia replied softly, tracing the name Isabella Davenport Russo on her mother's stone. She was both. She was not one or the other. "She would be so proud of you, Mia," Beatrice said, her voice thick with emotion as she placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. "You have her strength, her fire, but you have a kindness that I had to learn too late." "It's not too late," Mia said, turning and looking her grandmother in the eye. "We have now." In the coming months, Mia brought her own life into Beatrice's world. She convinced Beatrice to turn one of the penthouse's unused formal rooms into an art studio for her. Soon the sterile space was filled with the smell of turpentine and the vibrant colors of Mia's canvases. She also encouraged Beatrice to re-engage with the world, not as a titan of industry, but as a benefactor. Together they established the Isabella and Leo Russo Foundation, a charity dedicated to providing financial and medical support to young, struggling artists and their families. It was a legacy born not from the Davenport billions, but from the love story of a rich girl and a poor painter. It was a way to ensure that no other Isabellas or Leos would have their dreams extinguished by poverty and circumstance. Their bond was not forged in shared memories, but in a shared loss. They were rebuilding a family from the ashes of the past, their love story a quiet epilogue to the one that had ended so tragically. One evening, as they sat in the living room, a sketch pad in Mia's lap and a photo album in Beatrice's, Mia looked at the locket which she still wore every day. "The weeping willow," Mia said thoughtfully. "My mother wrote that its branches bend but never break." Beatrice smiled, a genuine warm expression that now came so easily to her. "That's the Davenports, that's the Russos, that's you, my dear Mia. You bent but you never broke, and you saved me in the process." In that quiet moment, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future, the billionaire and the waitress were gone. There was only a grandmother and her granddaughter finally home. Mia and Beatrice's story reminds us that family isn't just about the name you carry or the money you have. It's about the truth that connects us, the forgiveness that heals us, and the second chances we fight for. A simple locket, a symbol of a lost love, became the bridge across a chasm of lies and heartbreak, proving that it's never too late to reclaim what was stolen and to build a new legacy from the pieces of the past. Their journey shows that the most valuable heirlooms are not made of gold or silver, but of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of blood. If this story of loss and reunion touched your heart, please let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and subscribe to our channel for more content that makes you think and feel. Thank you for listening.